Let's compare every single bulldozer of LEGO Technic. There have been a total of 5 different bulldozers from 1979, 2007, 2009, 2014, and 2021. For this comparison, we're excluding all B models, and basically we'll be looking at 4 different categories for each bulldozer: the functionality, authenticity, playability, as well as value. I will give a score for each category to each bulldozer out of 5 points. The winner will be the one with most points. Let's begin with the LEGO Technic Bulldozer of 1979, set number 856. The first thing you might notice about the bulldozer is that it looks more like a tracked loader rather than a bulldozer, and I completely agree. However, you could rebuild the front accessory into an actual blade, and the official set name is simply Bulldozer. The functions of the set are absolutely incredible, especially for 1979. At the back we get 2 control knobs, one controls the elevation, while the other one controls the tilt. Back then, linear actuators did not exist, and everything moves in a fascinating way. To me personally, it's actually way more interesting than many modern Technic sets. The mechanisms are definitely something interesting. For functions, I give a perfect score of 5 points. When it comes to the authenticity, that's a different story. I just don't think it has everything that actual bulldozers have. At the back, there should have been a ripper, but the model lacks one. Furthermore, why is the cabin missing a seat? I understand that back in 1979, the selection of pieces was limited, but there could just be a very basic flat plate along with some 1x2 Lego bricks to make a brick-built seat. The front does have nice detailing and the model looks decent for 1979. However, because of the flaws I mentioned, I can only give 2 points for the authenticity. What about the playability? Given how good the functions and mechanisms are, the playability should also be excellent, right? Although the front bucket is quite fun to use, the set has one major flaw. When the bucket is raised, it will drop back down and the knob will spin. So unless the front bucket is all the way up, you always have to hold the control knob. Because of that, the playability doesn't quite get a perfect score, and I give it 3 points. Now what about value? This is actually kind of difficult to determine for such an old set, since the original retail price is actually unknown. I'm guessing it would retail roughly for $40 or $50 adjusted for inflation. Assuming it costs roughly $40, I give the set 4 points for value. The Bulldozer of 1979 receives a grand total of 14 points. If you would like to uncover more secrets of LEGO Technic, such as which B models are the worst, the rarest Technic pieces, and more, then make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. No pressure though, no pressure. Now here comes the fun part. Let's analyze the 2007 motorized bulldozer. This set is considered legendary. Not only did it introduce power functions and remotely controlled capabilities into LEGO Technic, but it also introduced a brand new track system which is still used to this day. The functionality of this set is pretty great. You get 4 motors, each responsible for its own function. We get the independently controlled tracks, blade height adjustment, as well as ripper height adjustment. Unlike the Cat D11, the ripper on this one can go all the way down. The bulldozer also features a V6 engine which is directly connected to the right track. The problem with that is, the right motor has a tendency to run slower due to the added friction, so the bulldozer will veer to the right. The functions replicate real bulldozers quite well. However, I should mention that because the motorized bulldozer included only 1 remote and 4 motors, you cannot run all 4 motors simultaneously. You have to switch between either the driving or the blade and ripper. For functions, I think this bulldozer easily gets 4 points. Why not 5? Well, it just doesn't have that many impressive mechanisms. It's just 1 motor per 1 function, so I have to take off 1 point. For authenticity, I think that the motorized bulldozer nailed it. This bulldozer isn't licensed, so it represents just a general bulldozer. In 2007, the wide variety of panels didn't exist, so the blade had to be brick built, but it still looks great. Every part of this bulldozer looks phenomenal, and it's such a nostalgic look and feel of LEGO Technic. It looks great, so I think it earns a perfect score of 5 points for the authenticity. What about the playability? Well, that's actually an interesting story. There were many sketch models of the bulldozer created, and eventually the Technic team narrowed down the selection to 2 models. One was completely manual, bigger, and with pneumatics, while the other one was the motorized bulldozer we got to see. Both models were given to a group of kids, and they vastly preferred the motorized one. Due to the amazing XL motors, the bulldozer could pull a tremendous weight, push large amounts of snow, and more. The playability gets a perfect score of 5 points. Let's look at the value value of the 2007 motorized bulldozer. It retailed for $150, which is around $200 adjusted for inflation. With that, you get 1,384 pieces, 4 motors, a battery box, 2 receivers, as well as a physical controller. This price is comparable to the Land Rover Defender, where you get almost twice as many pieces but no electronics. The valve articulated hauler is $50 more, but it has almost 1,000 more pieces and 1 motor less, but with a much more expensive powered-up system. The value of the bulldozer isn't the best, but it's certainly good. I will give 4 points for the value of the 2007 bulldozer. This brings us to a total of 18 points for the 2007 motorized bulldozer. Now, let's look at the LEGO Technic mini bulldozer. Its functions are pretty basic. We only get one knob at the back for blade elevation, and the set uses a very basic mechanism with a worm gear and a small 8-tooth gear for the blade. Of course, you can roll the bulldozer forward and back, but that's really it for the functions. It is a small set, but from purely a functions perspective, this set is pretty lackluster. As a result, I can only give 3 points for the functions. For the authenticity, it seems like the bulldozer would receive a perfect score. It has an amazing blade, a cabin, and really everything else that makes it recognizable as a bulldozer. However, this set lacks a ripper, much like the 1979 model. Because of the lack of the ripper, I can only give 3 points for the authenticity. The playability is trickier to determine. Other bulldozers can push objects pretty easily, whereas this one cannot. Still, for a small budget bulldozer, it manages to be pretty impressive, even featuring blade height adjustment. Despite the bulldozer being tiny, it's still a really playable model. Because of that, I give 4 points for the playability. What about the value of the bulldozer? It retailed for only $10 and adjusted for inflation, that is about $13. With that, we get 165 pieces and pretty good functionality. For such a cheap price, we are getting awesome functionality and a great selection of pieces. Because of that, I give this bulldozer 5 points for its value. This brings us to a total of 15 points for the mini bulldozer. Now, let's look at the 2014 bulldozer. This model has a plethora of functions. We get blade height adjustment with a pretty great mechanism. We also get ripper height adjustment, as well as the amazing V4 engine, which is connected to both of the tracks using a differential. This is a similar setup to the Cat D11 bulldozer. However, on the 2014 bulldozer, the top sprockets are the driving ones instead of the ones at the back. This set has every function that the 2007 motorized bulldozer had and a little more due to the differential. As a result, I give this bulldozer the full 5 points for functionality. But what about authenticity? This bulldozer isn't licensed, so it does not replicate any specific bulldozer. Rather, it is meant to be a representation of your average bulldozer. At first, it seems like this set would get a perfect score since it has the amazing blade, ripper, and more. However, it actually has flawed doors that don't even open properly. As a result, I can only give 4 points for the authenticity. What about the playability? Well, the bulldozer can push pretty heavy objects. It has a V4 engine with a differential, a functional blade, and a working ripper. However, the blade can't really go down that much to raise the bulldozer, so I only give 4 points for the playability. Let's look at the value of this bulldozer. It retailed for $50, which is about $60 adjusted for inflation. For that price, we get 617 pieces, a good selection of panels, and great play features. The value isn't bad, but it's not great either. The value of this bulldozer is pretty average. As a result, I give this bulldozer 3.5 points for the value. The bulldozer gets a grand total of 16.5 points. Finally, let's look at the amazing LEGO Technic Cat D11 bulldozer. First of all, we need to carefully analyze the functions. This is the single most functional bulldozer that LEGO has ever made. We get 2 independently controlled tracks, blade tilt, blade height adjustment, ripper height adjustment, the deployable ladder, as well as manually adjustable track tensioning. Personally, I do wish that this bulldozer had ripper tilt instead of the deployable ladder. Despite using only 4 motors, this bulldozer is responsible for 6 motorized functions, similar to the 8043 motorized excavator. This is because the bulldozer has an amazing gearbox. On top of that, similar to the 2014 bulldozer, the V12 engine is connected to both of the tracks with a differential. This bulldozer has wonderful engineering, great mechanisms, and more. This bulldozer easily earns a perfect score of 5 points for the functionality. What about the authenticity? That is, how well does this bulldozer resemble the real-life Cat D11 bulldozer? The Technic model seems to resemble its real-life counterpart perfectly. Even the tracks look practically identical. Interesting fact, The CAT D11 bulldozer ships with yellow tracks, but almost immediately after use, the paint wears off. The set looks beautiful, and I think it's incredibly recognizable. The designer really did a fantastic job, and I think the authenticity also gets 5 points. What about the playability? Believe it or not, this bulldozer has insane pushing power and incredible off-road performance. It can climb over some rocky terrain without any problems. I guess the one issue is that you have to wait a good while to switch between one of the 4 functions. However, it takes a while to switch the functions to prevent the gearbox from getting jammed. And personally, I see that as a positive rather than a negative, since I'd rather have a more reliable gearbox than a quick one. The control interface is kind of complicated, but you could just quickly make a 2-slider controller in the powered up app, so that's not really an issue. Overall, I think the playability is fantastic, so I would give it the full 5 points for that category. What about value? This is definitely the weakest point of the bulldozer, since it costs $450. For that same exact price, you could get the 4100 excavator with a little more pieces, 3 more motors, and an extra control plus hub. This bulldozer is clearly overpriced, and it should have been priced between $350 and $400. A similar price point to the Lamborghini would have been way better. Therefore, I can only give it 2 points for the value, which brings us to a total of 17 points for the bulldozer. So, purely based on my scoring system, the 2007 bulldozer is the king, and a second close winner is the CAT D11 bulldozer, followed by the 2014 model, and then the mini bulldozer, and finally the 1979 model. Personally though, I would place the LEGO Technic CAT D11T set number 4131 on top. It is the single most functional bulldozer, has track tensioning, an amazing gearbox, and more. Everything else matches my personal opinion though. If you would like to learn more about the LEGO Technic CAT D11 bulldozer, then click on the video right over here. This is your Unbricking here, and I'll see you in the next one.